Thank you, Matt. Up next, we have Dr. Brian Calder. He's the research professor and associate director of the Center for Coastal and Ocean Mapping and the NOAA Joint Hydrographic Center at the University of New Hampshire, and a former professor, so it's exciting to get to time you for once. So thank you very much. And reminder, we'll be taking questions at the end. Thanks.
I'm regretting rushing you through your thesis presentation now, Bree. Thank you very much for that introduction. And I wanted to look at data licensing from the academic perspective now, and particularly how we go about doing the socialization piece. As Matt described, I think it's quite clear that there are bigger advantages in having data licenses, but academics and maybe other data providers tend to be a little lazy at times, and we don't necessarily want to be involved in anything other than doing the science. And so we have to be convincing about why data licensing should just become a normal piece of doing that science. I want to illustrate the problems that we might have with that process by looking at an example from our own history at the center where we just got it wrong, and how we put it right and what we learned in the process. And hopefully that's illustrative of how we're going to communicate this to other members of our community. Next slide, please. Since the very start of the center, we've been involved in collecting data for the Extended Continental Shelf project. So since 2003, we've been at sea collecting whole bunches of data. Now, we're not a data archive. We send all of our data to NCEI in Boulder, but we do make products available. And when we started, we made them available just on our website. And being good academics, we made the best available data we could, put it up on our website, and then dusted our hands and walked away. And that's fine. Next slide, please. Until one of your colleagues at Google comes along and says to you, great, we'd love to use your data. What's the license? And we all kind of looked at each other and scratched our heads and said, well, we'll get back to you. And so this is not because we didn't know about licensing. If you go to the next slide, please. We do a lot of data licensing. In fact, some of the people on the panel here have actually signed licenses with us for some of the things that we've done, but they've been mostly for software. And we've done commercial licenses like the one you can see on the left here, and we've done open source licenses like the one you see on the right here, depending on the appropriate choice for the systems or software that we were using. So we knew about licenses, we just hadn't thought about it in the context of data. And so we went to our university lawyers and we said to them, hey, we need to do this. What would you recommend? If you go to the next slide, this is what they recommended, and they asked us to put on their website, our website. Now, that's a wall of text, and I'm not going to ask you to read it. I can translate it for you. If you go to the next slide, this is basically what it says. If anything goes wrong, it's not our fault. Now, that's not a license. What they were trying to do was to protect the university. The lawyers, that's their job. We asked them the wrong thing, really, is the honest truth. But this isn't actually terribly useful. Like I said, we got it wrong. What this does is actually makes our data more difficult to use, because anybody who looks at our data has to read this and basically has to go get their lawyer and have their lawyer read it too, and that's not useful. Now, we actually made it worse for ourselves. If we move on to the next slide, when the data goes out, it goes out with a use case statement in the metadata. Now, we were quite proud of the metadata. It was the first time we'd actually done ISO metadata when we put this together, and we worked with Boulder to work out how to do this at NCEI. And this is the use statement that we put into it. Now, we're kind of getting closer to a license. If you move to the next slide, I'll highlight the piece that is sort of a license. It's not quite a license. It doesn't say it's a license. It could be interpreted as being approximately a by attribution license. But the problem is that it doesn't say it's a license. It's open to interpretation. It's a custom piece of text that you have to then go and interpret. And it's mixed in with other things like copyright and so on, which makes it difficult to understand what it is that you want to do with this data. And so if you want to use our data, you have to go through this whole process of having a meeting with us or asking us what we intended and having the lawyers involved. In trying to make our data more useful, we actually made it harder to use. Like I said, we got it wrong. So in practice, if you go to the next slide, please, we made the wrong decision to start with. In effect, we asked the wrong question, and we can't blame the lawyers. They tried their best, and we actually have a very good relationship with them. We asked them to get us to our goals, but the problem was that our goals were not clear. And so they did their best to get us there, but we didn't know where it was that we actually wanted to go, and that was our fault. What we could have done with, if we move on to the next slide, please, is a clearer list of what it was that we should be asking for. And in fact, that's what Matt just gave you in his presentation. We want clear communication to the end user that minimizes ambiguity. We want ideally to have well-known agreement terms, recognized terms, so that you don't have to go and ask your lawyer to read text. You can say, for example, this data comes with a CC0 license. Is that okay? And the lawyer can say, yes, we looked at it, that's fine. And we can just move on. And of course, we want it to be machine readable, and we want to have the license move with the product. So we could have done with this list a decade ago, and it would have made things much clearer for us. But like I said, it wasn't clear to us then what we should have been doing. And so we just didn't do the right thing. I'm happy to say, however, if we go to the next slide, as of now, our data that goes out with this in the usage statement. And so basically we're saying all of our data that's going out this way goes out with a CC0 license. We indicate what that license is, and that's then clear. It's machine readable. It's obvious what the license is. It's a standard license. You don't have to go and ask for a legal opinion, and you can get your lawyers to pre-approve certain licenses and minimize the effort involved in actually using our data. Hopefully that makes our data much more valuable for people to use, including our colleagues at NOAA, who after all funded it through grants to the center. So I want to finish up by looking at some things we've learned through this process. If you move on to the next slide, and it's in 4 basic groups here. And the first one is awareness. We were not aware that data licensing was even something we should be considering. And we need to make sure that everybody is aware. And that's something where we basically have to be evangelists. We have to go and talk about this to our colleagues and make sure they know that this is something they should be paying attention to. And the NOAA data policy and the NOAA data strategy and so on are all very good ways of doing that, but it's something that we want to try and get individual scientists to also do. So we should talk about it and make clear that we do apply data licenses. The second piece is commonality, and what I mean by that is that we should have a standard license that we can prefer to recommend. Whether that's Creative Commons Zero, which is what I think we would prefer, or something else, it doesn't matter. But the important point is I don't want to have to go and recruit a lawyer every time I look at some data to read it and understand the license and interpret it for me and qualify for me that it's okay for us to use it. Scientists tend to be manic about their science and lazy about everything else. Because I'm a scientist, I get to say that. What we're trying to do here is to provide for them the easy option, the easy button, where they can say, oh, I've got to do a data license. Which one do we use? Oh, okay, that was recommended, fine, let's do it. And then we can go on to doing the science, which is after all why we got into this business in the first place. And the more we can do that, the better it is. Now, there will be data sets where there are exceptions and we want to do something else, but they should be truly exceptional. We shouldn't just do it because we want to. There must be a good reason not to apply the CC0 license, ideally. And by recommending a license, hopefully we can make that happen. The third piece is support. Again, there's a concern that adding extra data licenses might actually make things difficult and require more effort, and we don't really particularly want to do that. So what I would suggest is that we try to make it as easy as possible for people to apply a data license. Now, if you look at a software license, it's quite often where you get a license, it'll say afterwards how to apply this license, and it will give very clear instructions to say, here's what you do if you want to apply this license to your software. We should be doing the same thing for data licenses. We should make it as easy as possible, make it as easy for the data provider to say yes as we can possibly make it, and we can provide support to do that. And the final piece is reinforcement. Not my favorite choice. This is more the carrot than the stick, but it is an option. NOAA could provide a special award condition that says, and you will apply a data license. Now, most academics won't like it. They might grumble about it a little bit, but they'll do it because it's how they're going to get their funding. And that, after all, is the important piece. So it's certainly something that we could do. I think the other way that we could do it is, rather than wielding that particular hammer, we could also say, if we can't use your data, are you actually doing active data management the way that we've requested that you do it and that you said that you would in your grant application? Data management protocols are now a standard piece of any grant request. Making the data license part of the data management protocol would wrap it all up, and then we could quite easily say, well, we'd love to fund you, but your data management process is not adequate because it doesn't include a data license. That, I think, would motivate many people to say, okay, we've got to do this. And then we go back to the carrot piece and say, here's which license do I use? Oh, there's the recommended license. Okay, now we're good. So I think we have to do both sides of that, that equation. If you move to the next slide, please. Just to sum up for you, I'll leave up some contact details here. I'm happy to talk about our experience if anybody wants to, or answer questions later. I think in the academic community, we want to do the right thing. We just need to know what that right thing is. And that's what I'm hoping that we can do in this process as we move forward, is to be able to provide the recommendations on what we think the right thing is, to make it easier for academics who are busy doing their science to do the right thing as part of their science. So thank you. Bree, I'll hand it back to you.
Thank you, Dr. Calder. Interesting perspective from the academic side, and some neat new ideas.